Learning 3D is not rocket science. If it was, I definitely would not be doing it. And using Cinema 4D is the easiest way to get up and running into the world of 3D. I'm EJ Hassenfratz, creative director at School of Motion, and today I'm going to show you how you can create this eye-catching motion graphics piece all in about 20 minutes. Let's go ahead and dive in. Now, even if you've never touched another 3D application before, Cinema 4D makes the process of creating motion graphics extremely easy. Let's begin by just starting out with creating that hexagon object, and we'll do that by navigating to our 3D primitive object menu. If I click and hold on this button, you'll see this is a list of all of our basic 3D shapes. We even have a little figure object here. But what we can use to create a hexagon is a cylinder. And when I release my mouse, you'll see the cylinder got added to my viewport here, as well as my object manager. Now, the object manager is where all the objects in your scene are going to be represented and where you can select them. And when you have an object selected, you have access to its attributes. So if I go into this object's object tab, you can see that here we have access to all of the cylinder's object properties. So you can adjust things like radius and height by clicking and dragging on these up and down arrows. I can also adjust the radius and the height by clicking and dragging on these little dots in my viewport, and you can see that that is affecting the radius. And if I click and hold on this dot, this is affecting the height. So a couple ways to adjust your radius and height. You can also just double click on either of these little fields and just enter in a number, hit enter, and that will take effect. So if you want precise values, you can do that here. So if I just enter in 100, hit enter, you can see that take effect. Now you can also adjust the amount of segments that are added to your object. And if we adjust something like the rotation segments, you can see that if I bring this down to 6 rotation segments, we have a hexagonal 3D shape. Now to get a better view on my object, I can utilize the 3D viewport navigation tools up here. If I click and hold on this 4 arrow cross here, this is our pan tool. If I click and drag on this up and down arrow, this is going to zoom in and zoom out, or dolly in or dolly out. And if I click and hold on these rotation arrows, this is your orbit. Awesome. So we can get a definitely better look at our 3D object here. And the one thing I'm going to point out is in real life, no object has perfectly sharp edges. Even a knife's edge under a microscope has a rounded edge. And in 3D, everything is way too perfect. You can see that these edges are so sharp. So to make this look more realistic, we're going to add rounding to our edges here. And to do that, we're just going to navigate over to the caps menu and turn on something called fillet. Now fillet is just a fancy pants way of saying rounded edges. And if I check this on, you'll see that we just rounded out our geometry here. And you can control the radius of that rounding or fillet by adjusting this radius here by clicking the up and down arrows. Now if I just check this on and off, check out how much detail that adds to our 3D object. You can see all of these nice specular highlights, and this just looks way more realistic. So always add round edges when you have the opportunity to make your 3D look way more realistic. Awesome. So we got one cylinder here, one hexagonal shape. How can we create a lot more of these? Well, in Cinema 4D, that's extremely easy. What we can do is go to this little menu here and click and hold the little cube here with all the dots. And this will open up our MoGraph menu, and it has a whole bunch of tools that will allow you to create motion graphic animations very easily and do things like clone your object. So to clone and make multiple copies of our hexagon, we are going to grab the very aptly named cloner object. When we add that to our scene, you're going to see that nothing happens. For the cloner to take effect on the cylinder and clone more of these cylinders, all we need to do is simply make it a child of this object. And to do that, we're going to click, hold, and drag right on top of this cloner object, and you're going to see this cursor icon change to a downward arrow into a box. And this means that when you release your mouse, you're going to make that cylinder or that object you had selected a child of that cloner. And if I zoom out by clicking and dragging down on this zoom in and zoom out arrows, you'll see that we just cloned a bunch more of these cylinders. Now if I click on this cloner object and navigate to the object tab, you can see exactly what this cloner object's doing at the moment. It's cloning all of our objects in a grid array fashion, as you can see here. And you can also see that in the count area, this is cloning in a 3 by 1 by 3 grid. Now, this is your X coordinate, this is your Y, and this is your Z. So if you're not quite familiar with X, Y, and Z coordinates, you can look in this lower left area and see which 3D coordinate is facing which direction. Okay, so we can go ahead and even adjust things like the size or the spacing between each of these objects in either X, Y, or Z. Now, we don't want to clone this in a grid array. We want to create a honeycomb. So luckily, if we click and hold on this drop-down menu here, we have the aptly named honeycomb array, which is going to do exactly what we want to do, is clone these cylinders or these hexagons in a honeycomb array. So you're going to see that this is going to clone everything, and it's going to be kind of staggered and diagonal. If I zoom out here, you can see that this is a pretty big grid of hexagons here, and there's a lot of space between each of these cylinders. So we can adjust the size and the width and the height by just clicking and dragging on these options here. And you can see that this is actually facing the wrong direction, right? We want to have these cylinders facing towards us. So to do that, we can go into the Transform tab, and here we can adjust our clones in either the position, scale, or rotation. And you can see that we have the rotation in the heading, which is not the direction we want, so I'll Command or Control Z to undo that. In the pitch, which is what we want, or the banking. So I'm just going to undo that, and what we're going to want is to just tilt these or rotate these objects 90 degrees so they're facing towards us. Now we can go back into our Object tab and start adjusting the width and the height, and we can kind of adjust these so there are no little gaps in between there. So if I go ahead and click and drag on this dolly in or dolly out, you can see that we just need to adjust these a little bit more. And now we got this really nice hexagon grid here. And to fill out the screen, let's give a bit more clones in the width and the height count. There we go, 12 by 12 sounds good. I'm just gonna pan here and get a nice camera view, just like this. All right, now what I want to do is add some animation. What I want to do is maybe have all of these hexagons kind of undulating like pistons up and down, and we can actually achieve this extremely easily using some of the MoGraph tools in Cinema 4D. And how we can do this is to add modifiers that can affect our cloned objects. So if I go back into the menu where I found my cloner object, you'll see we have all of these different types of effectors. And these are all different modifiers that can affect and animate all of our cloned objects. So the one effector we can choose for this situation is a random effector. Now, when I had that cloner object selected, it automatically added that random effect to all of my clones. Now, if this doesn't happen for you, on your cloner object, go into the Effectors tab, and if you don't see the random effector there, let me just go ahead and delete that real quick. You can just simply drag and drop that random effector into the effectors list, and you'll now know that this random effector is now affecting all of your clones. Now let's go into our random effector and see what's going on. Now, if you navigate to your parameter tab, you can see what the random effector is doing here. You can see positions active, and we have a value of 50 centimeters in the X, Y, and Z. What this means is that this random effector is randomly moving our cylinders in the X, Y, and Z anywhere between negative 50 centimeters and positive 50 centimeters in space. So if I adjust this Y, you can see that we're just increasing the range in which our cylinders can move in the Y direction. Now, that's actually where we want to apply the randomness, is in that Y direction here. So we can have like these pistons kind of jumping up and down. Now, to isolate the randomness to only the Y, all I need to do is zero out the X and the Z and hit enter. And now you'll see we are only randomizing in the Y. Now, if I make this Y value a little bit too high, you can start to see gaps here. So to fill in these gaps, all we need to do is go back into our cylinder, go into the Object Properties tab, and just increase the height of our cylinders so we can make this much, much longer. And now we can go back into our random effector and keep adjusting this to our taste. Do we want more randomness or less randomness? And I'm actually liking this at a random value of 40 centimeters. So again, this is allowing us to apply random position values of negative 40 centimeters and positive 40 centimeters to the position in the Y direction of our hexagons here. Now, if I go and hit the play button, you'll see that this random effector doesn't actually apply any random animation, at least at this point. So to animate this, we need to check on a certain type of parameter in our random effector that can animate this and have this kind of undulate up and down. If I hit the escape key to stop our animation playback and go into the effector tab, you'll see we have this random mode. And we have a few different modes. Some of them are static noise or static randomness that is adding randomized values to adjust our cloned objects. And then we have animated noise types like turbulence. And if I add turbulence, that is going to change my menu to add this animation speed and the scale. Now, this animation speed is the speed in which our random noise is going to kind of undulate. So if you're familiar with After Effects, think of fractal noise, like animated fractal noise. This is kind of what's happening here behind the scenes. And then we have the scale of that fractal noise that is affecting all these random values. Now, if I hit play now, you'll see we have all these kind of hexagons acting like pistons, moving up and down, oscillating up and down. And this is going way too fast. Like maybe if you have a frenetic B, maybe this is the type of vibe you want. But let's slow this down. And to do that, we can just go and just bring down this animation speed to say 15%. You can see that's nice and subtle. We can also adjust the actual scale of that animated noise. And if you scale it up large enough, you can see what we have. We have more of this like wave. If I really scale this up, you can start to see some really nice, almost like waves here. And the smaller the scales get, like maybe 5%, we have a much smaller noise and more randomized values here. So this is looking really nice. I think I might bring down the animation speed to 10 just to slow it down a little bit more so it's not so distracting, because what we want to do eventually is add a title in here, a 3D title, and to have a very fast moving background will really distract from our logo. So I'm just going to hit the escape key and go back to frame 0. And as of right now, we don't have any colors or materials applied to our hexagon. So let's go ahead and double click in our material manager down here. It was empty, but if you double click anywhere in this little window here, it will create a new material. And if I double click on this new material that we created, I can rename this material. So let's just say I wanted to add yellow to this cylinder. I can just type in yellow just to keep all of our materials straight and go into the color channel, click on this color chip and just choose yellow here. So that's looking good. I'll click OK and I will close out of my material editor. And to apply this material to our cylinder, I'm just going to simply click and drag and drop this onto our cylinder here. And you'll see there is our yellow material on our cylinder, and you can see all of our cylinders turned yellow. Now, what if you wanted two colors here? Maybe you wanted yellow and blue. So what we can do is we can double click again in this material manager, and that will create a new material. I'm just going to double click on this newly created material, and let's rename this blue. And I'll just go to the color channel here, click on the color chip, and just choose a nice complementary blue here. And then what I can do is just create another one of these cylinders. And I can do that by clicking and holding Control or Command and clicking and dragging this down until I see an arrow right next to it. And I'm going to release my mouse button. And you'll see that I didn't quite get it. I didn't quite get this right because this is not going to be cloned because it's not a child of this cloner object here. So when that happens, and it's a common mistake, is if you just click and drag and then hover over that cloner again so you get the downward facing arrow, this will allow you to then place that cylinder underneath that cloner object, and now it's cloning both of these cylinders. Now what we can do, since we have two cylinders, is click and drag on this blue material and add it to our cylinder. Now we don't need this first yellow material, so I can click on that little icon there and just hit delete to delete that. Now you can see that we're alternating between blue, yellow, blue, yellow, and that is controlled in your cloner object tab here. So this clones menu, right now it's just iterating between blue and yellow, blue and yellow. If we wanted to randomize this, what we can do is click and hold on this menu and say random. And this will randomly choose between blue and yellow clones and scatter them throughout this cloned honeycomb array. To adjust the seed or the random seed that's being used, we can just click this button here, click the up and down arrows, and get the type of random seed we want. Maybe we want to find one that, okay, that has way more yellow. This is looking good. Awesome. So very easy to apply materials to your object. Let's go ahead and apply a title. So to do that, I'm going to go back into my MoGraph menu here and grab some MoText. And right away, you're not going to see anything, but you are going to see this axis here. And what's going on is that we put this MoText object, when it was created, right on top of the cloned cylinders here. So what I can do is hover on this Z axis arrow here and click and drag, and this will move our text object forward, as you can see here. And then if I hover over and highlight the X arrow here, this will then constrain the movement in the X. And if I hover over the Y arrow, this will constrain in the Y. Now let's check out our MoText. This is really, really big 3D text. So let's go ahead and we can adjust things like the actual depth of the extrude. I can adjust the text that's actually being generated. So what are the letters we want here? Let's just type in honey, because why not? And let's go and adjust our height to just scale down our text. Now you can see we're scaling from the left justified area here. What we can do to align this so it's centered is to just go into the align area here and choose middle. And now our axis will be in the center of our 3D text here. And now I can hover over this X arrow and constrain movement in the X, and then constrain movement in the Y as I hover over and highlight the green Y arrow here. And I can also hover over this little corner here, and when that's highlighted, this is actually selecting a 3D plane, and I can constrain movement in the Y and X 3D plane. So I'll place that right there. I'll scale this down a little bit more and move this up. Just building our muscle memory on how to move things around in 3D space, and then maybe adjust the depth here. Now we can do a lot of things with this text. We can change the font by clicking on this drop down here for the font, and choose universe to thicken it up a little bit. We can adjust the horizontal spacing. We can also do some kerning, and this is something that is really cool to be able to do. Is if I click on this show 3D GUI, you can see all of our letters here, and if I just click and drag on the little square with that letter in it, I can actually kern my 3D text. So if you are a avid kerner, this 3D GUI is for you. Now I said that everything in 3D is way too perfect. Of course, this text has perfectly sharp edges. So if we navigate to the caps tab on this MoText object, you'll notice that the cylinders also had that caps tab that we activated the fillet or the rounding. We can do the same thing on our MoText object, and you'll see that this is called a bevel on our text, so not a fillet. And right now we have no bevel. It's a 0 centimeter size, so no bevel. And if we just bring this up, if I just click and drag on my size here, you can see we're adding really nice rounding. Now let's go ahead and click and drag on the up and down arrows to zoom in here so we can actually see the rounding there. And you can see how much of a rounding we can get. If we go all the way up, we almost get like a chiseled type of look, which is really cool. But we just want a tiny bit of bevel there, like 0.32, and I'd say this is looking really good. Now we have no material on our text here, so let's go ahead and do that. Let's just double click in this material area again to create a third material, and let's just keep it, and let's change this to black. So I'll double click on this material, I'll rename it black, hit enter, and then I'll choose black. Now, another thing to note about 3D is you never want pure blacks or pure whites, because if you ever do any compositing and you want to use curve adjustments or anything like that, there's no coming back from just 100% white. You can't crush it or brighten it up any. So that's why I always recommend that you use, like a very dark gray or a very light gray for your whites. Okay, so I'm just going to choose like a value like that. So it's 10% instead of, fully 0. And that's looking good. And then to add that to my text, I can either drag and drop it on the MoText, or I can drag and drop it directly on my text in the viewport. So a couple ways to add a material. Now, if I go back onto my MoText object, I'll go back into my object tab, and I'm just going to uncheck this show 3D GUI for our kerning. And I can go ahead and I can adjust this and change this to anything, because this is live, it's always editable. So I can type in Maxon and then just click anywhere in the interface to update and just kind of zoom out. And I notice we have some kerning issues there. So to keep my graphic design teacher happy with me, I'm going to click on the show 3D GUI and just adjust this X letter here and the O just to kern that a little bit, and then uncheck that. And there we go. If we hit play, we have this really nice undulating animation. Let's go ahead and finish this up with adding some 3D lights. Just gonna hit escape to pause the animation. So now all we have to do is add lights, and you can add your own lights by clicking and holding on this menu and choosing your own lights. Or I have lights that are already made for this project file that are in this hidden layer. So this is almost like layer groups that you can group different objects together and hide them from the actual object manager here. I'm just going to go and click on the hierarchy to reveal them in our object manager, and then click this little eyeball so I can actually see this in the viewport. So this will actually render, and that's all we need to do there. And now to see what this looks like when we would go to render, we can actually render this active view by just clicking on this little clapper icon with the rectangle, and this will be our render right here. Now you can see the nice lighting and shadows. We have a little bit of anti-aliasing here, and I would like to add a little bit of contact shadows or ambient occlusion here. And we can do that all in our render settings. So to get to our render settings, we're going to go to the clapper with the gear. And there's our render settings. And here we can, save out whatever format we want. So MP4, we can choose where we want to save our file. So right there. And we can also go to our output and choose our width and height. We can choose from a bunch of different presets as well. So if you want to do like 1080p, 2997, you can also change the frame range. So if we rendered right now, it only render the current frame. So to render all of our frames and render our entire animation here, we're just going to choose all frames, and this will render from frame 0 to frame 90. And to clean up the anti-aliasing, we're just going to go to anti-aliasing, and typically this is either set to geometry or none. I'm going to change this to best. That'll be your highest quality anti-aliasing here. And then to add our contact shadows, which is basically just the self-shadowing that happens in real life. What that's called in 3D is ambient occlusion. And you can find it in this effects menu, where you can also find things like color correction or all types of other things. But ambient occlusion is what we want. And to see what ambient occlusion is doing, we can go to render our current view. And you can see that we added these nice shadows right in the nooks and crannies of all of our hexagons here. Now I think this effect is pretty heavy-handed at this point, so what I can do is dial back the maximum ray length, which is basically just how far out the ambient occlusion spreads. If I bring this to say like 30, what we can do now is click the render active view again. You can see that's much less heavy-handed, but we still have all the nice nooks and crannies here. Now you can also change the color of the ambient occlusion. Instead of having just pure black, we can double click on this color chip, maybe brighten this up, maybe add a little bit of like a blue hue there, and let's just render this preview view one more time. And that's looking really nice. So when you're ready to render, you have your file path set up that you want to save to, you got your format that you want to render to, your anti-aliasing is set to best. What you can do to render this is go to your clapper with the play icon here, click and hold, and go to render to picture viewer. And I already have a file there. I'll just click yes to right over it. And what this will do is show you the Cinema 4D render view, and you can actually see this render frame by frame. And you can basically just sit back, relax, and imagine all of the Emmy awards that you'll be winning soon enough. See, that wasn't so hard now, was it? Now, if you want to learn much more about Cinema 4D from the ground up and discover all of the things that are possible inside of Cinema 4D, and you're not sick of me yet, definitely check out my course at schoolofmotion.com called Cinema 4D Basecamp. This course is going to get you comfortable and up and running in 3D with all of the basic foundational principles that you'll have to learn to be a successful 3D motion artist. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you at Basecamp.